Hey everyone, Razzbowski here, and welcome back to Chapter 2 of the Five Nights at Freddy's novel, The Silver Eyes. The support shown on the very first chapter was absolutely fantastic. It was absolutely delightful. Thank you all so much. The comments about how good my reading was were very, very humbling, and it really spurs me on and gives me energy for the next episode. Thank you so much for all of that. If you're enjoying this series and want to hit that like button, that really is appreciated. So, let's get into Chapter 2, baby! Okay, Charlie pulled to a stop, feeling the soft give of dirt under her tires, and turned off the car. She got out and surveyed their surroundings. The sky was rich, dark blue, the last trails of sunset streaking off to the west. The parking lot was unpaved, and before them lay a sprawling monster of a building, a rising acre of glass and concrete. There were lamps in the parking lot that had never been used, and no lights shone out into the lot. The building itself looked like an abandoned sanctuary, entombed in black trees amidst the distant roar of civilization. She looked at Jessica in the passenger seat, who was craning her neck out of the window. "Is this the right place?" Jessica asked. Charlie shook her head slowly, not quite certain what she was seeing. "I don't know," she whispered. Charlie got out of the car and stood in silence as John and Carlton pulled up beside her. "What is this?" John stepped out of the car curiously and stared blankly at the monument. "Does anyone have a flashlight?" He looked at each of them. Carlton held up his keychain and waved a feeble glow of a pen light for a minute. "Great," John muttered, walking away with resignation. "Hold on a sec," Charlie said and went around to her trunk. "My aunt makes me carry around a bunch of stuff for emergencies." Aunt Jen, loving but severe, had taught Charlie self-reliance above almost anything else. Before she let Charlie have her old blue Honda, she had insisted that Charlie know how to change the tire, check the oil, and know the basic parts of the engine. In the trunk, a big black box tucked in next to a jack, a spare tire, a small crowbar. She had a blanket, a heavy police-issue flashlight, bottled water, granola bars, matches, and emergency flares. Charlie grabbed the flashlight. Carlton grabbed a granola bar. Almost by a silent agreement, they began to walk the building's perimeter, Charlie holding up the light in a steady beam in front of them. The building itself looked almost finished, but the ground was all dirt and rock, uneven and soft. Charlie shone the light on the ground where the grass had grown patchy and the dirt inches long. "No one has been digging for a while," Charlie said. The place was massive, and it took a long time to circumnavigate. It wasn't long before the rich blue of the evening was overtaken by a blanket of scattered silver clouds and stars. The surfaces of the building were all the same smooth beige concrete, with windows too high up the walls to see inside. "Did they really just build this whole thing and then just leave?" Jessica said. "Carlton," said John, "you really don't know anything about what happened." Carlton shrugged expansively. "I told you, I knew there was construction, but I didn't know anything else." "Why would they do this?" John seemed almost paranoid, scouting the trees, though some eyes might be looking back at him. "It just goes on and on." He squinted, gazing along the outside wall of the building that seemed to stretch endlessly into the distance. He glanced back to the trees as if making sure he hadn't missed a building somehow. No, it was here. He placed his hand on the drab concrete facing. "It's gone." After a moment, he gestured to the others and began to walk back to the way they came. Reluctantly, Charlie turned back, following the group. They had kept going until they could see the cars up again ahead in the darkness. "Sorry, guys. I'd hoped there would be at least something familiar," Carlton said exhaustedly, looking back to make sure they hadn't missed anything. "Yeah," Charlie said. She had known it would be, but seeing that Freddy's had been razed to the ground was still a shock. It was so paramount, sometimes in her mind, that she wanted to get rid of it, wanted to scrub the memories, good and bad, from her head as if it had never been. Now someone had scrubbed it from the landscape, and it felt like a violation. It should have been up to her, right? She thought, because you had the money to buy it and preserve it, like Aunt Jen did with the house. "Charlie?" John was saying her name, and it sounded like he was repeating it. "Sorry," she said. "What were you saying?" "Do you want to go inside?" Jessica said. Charlie was surprised they had only now considered this, but then again none of them were usually prone to criminal activity. The thought was a release, and she took a deep breath. Speaking on exhale, "Why not?" she said, almost laughing. She hefted the flashlight, her arms were getting tired. "Anyone else want a turn?" She waved it back and forth like a pendulum. Carlton took it and took a moment to appreciate its weight. "Why is this so heavy?" he said, passing it off to John. "Here you go." "It's a police flashlight," Charlie said absently. "You can hit people with it." Jessica wrinkled her nose. "Your aunt really wasn't kidding around, huh? Ever use it?" "Not yet." Charlie winked and made a half-threatening glance at John, who returned an uncertain half-smile, unsure how to react. The wide entrances were sealed with hammered metal doors, no doubt intended to be temporary until construction was finished. Still, it wasn't difficult to find a way in, as many large mounds of gravel and sand scaled the walls, leading right up to the edges of the large gaping windows. "They're not trying to keep people out," said John. "What's anyone going to steal?" Charlie said, staring at the blank, towering walls. They climbed the hills slowly, the gravel shifting and sliding beneath their feet as they went. Carlton reached the window first and peered through. Jessica looked over his shoulder. "Can we drop down?" John said. "Yes," said Carlton. "No," Jessica said at precisely the same time. "I'll go," Charlie said. She felt reckless. Without looking through to see how far the fall was, she put her feet through the opening and let herself drop. She landed, knees bent, the impact rocking her, but it did not hurt. She looked up at her friend, staring down. "Oh, hang on," Charlie called, pulling a short stepladder from a wall nearby and setting it under the window. "Okay," she said. "Come on." They dropped down one by one and looked around them. Inside was an atrium, or maybe it would have been a food court with metal benches and plastic tables scattered around, some bolted to the floor. The ceiling rose high above them, with a glass roof where they could see the stars peering down at them. "Very post-apocalyptic," Charlie joked, her voice echoing in the space. Jessica sang a brief, wordless scale, suddenly startling them into silence. Her voice rang out pure and clear, something beautiful in the emptiness. "Very nice, but let's not call too much attention to ourselves," John said. "Right," Jessica said, still very happy with herself. As they walked on, Carlton swept up and took her arm. "Your voice is amazing," he said. It's just the acoustics," Jessica said, attempting humility, but not meaning a word of it. They walked the empty halls, peering into each of the massive cavities where the department stores might have been. Some parts of the mall had almost been finished, while others were in shambles. Some hallways were littered with piles of dusty concrete bricks and stacks of wood. Others were lined with glass-paled storefronts, lights hanging in perfect rows above their heads. "It's like a lost city," John said. "Like Pompeii," Jessica said, "just without the volcano." "No," Charlie said. "There's nothing here." The whole place had a sterile feel to it. It was not abandoned. It had never sustained life at all. She looked in a store window across from her, one of the few with glass, wondering what would have been displayed. She imagined mannequins dressed in bright clothing, but when she tried to picture them, all she could see was blank faces, concealing something. She suddenly felt out of place, unwelcomed by the building itself. Charlie began to feel restless, some of the luster wearing off of the adventure. They had come, Freddy's was gone, and so was the shrine she had kept in her thoughts, where she could still find Michael playing where she last saw him. John stopped suddenly, turning off the flashlight as carefully as he could. He put a finger to his lips, motioning silence. He gestured back the way they had come. In the distance they saw a small light, bobbing in the darkness like a ship in the fog. "Someone else is here," he hissed. "A night guard, maybe?" Carlton whispered. "Why would an abandoned building need a guard?" Charlie wondered. "Kids probably come here to party," Carlton said and grinned. "I would have come here too to party if I'd known about it, or if I had partied." "Okay, well, let's backtrack slowly," John said. "Jessica?" John started and made a zip-it motion across his lips. They continued down the hallway, this time with the dimmer light of Carlton's keychain. "Wait!" Jessica stopped with a whisper, looking intently at the walls surrounding them. "Something's not right." Yeah, no giant pretzels, I know. Carlton seemed sincere. Jessica waved a hand at him impatiently. No. Something isn't right about the architecture. She took several steps back, trying to see the whole of it. Something is definitely not right, she repeated. It's bigger on the outside. Bigger on the outside? Charlie repeated, sounding puzzled. I mean, there's a big difference between where the inside wall is and where the outside wall is. Look! Jessica ran along a length of wall where the two stores would have been. There would have been a store here and a store there. John pointed to the obvious, not understanding the problem. But there's something in the middle, Jessica exclaimed, beating her hands against an empty portion of the wall. This part juts out into the parking lot like the stores on each side, but there's no way into it. You're right. Charlie started walking towards Jessica, studying the walls. There should be another entrance here. And, Jessica dropped her voice so that only Charlie could hear her, about the same size as Freddy's, don't you think? Charlie's eyes widened, and she took a quick step back from Jessica. What are you two whispering about? Carlton stepped closer. We're talking about you, Jessica said sharply, and they walked into one of the vacant department stores that seemed to sandwich the sealed space. Come on, she said. Let's take a look. They started combing the wall as a group, clustered around the tiny light. Charlie was not sure what to hope for. Aunt Jen had warned her about coming back. She didn't encourage Charlie to skip the memorial, not directly, but she wasn't pleased that she would be returning to Hurricane. Just be careful, she had said. Some things, some memories, are best left undisturbed. Is that why you kept Dad's house? Charlie had thought now. Is that why you kept paying for it, left it untouched like some kind of shrine, but never visiting? Hey! John was gesturing wildly, running to catch up to the rest of them. Hide! The light was out in the hall again, bobbing up and down, and it was coming closer. Charlie glanced around. They were already too deep inside the massive store to get out in time, and there seemed to be nowhere to hide. Here, Jessica whispered. There was a break in the wall beside a rig of scaffolding, and they hurried into it, squeezing past stacks of open boxes and sheets of plastic hanging from the ceiling. They made their way down what appeared to be a makeshift hallway, just on the other side of the department store wall. It was really like an alleyway. It was more incongruous with the rest of the mall, not shiny and new, but dank and musty. One wall was made of the same concrete as the outside of the building, though it was rough and unfinished, and the other was exposed brick, faded and more smoothed with age, the mortar crumbling, leaving chinks and holes. Heavy wooden shelves of cleaning equipment stood against the wall, listing to the side, their boards sinking under the weight of old paint cans and mysterious buckets. Something was dripping from the uncovered pipes overhead, leaving puddles that they had all carefully stepped around. A mouse scuttled by, almost running over Carlton's foot. Carlton made a strangled sound, hand over his mouth. They crouched behind one of the wooden shelving units, pressing up against the wall. Charlie doused the light and waited. Charlie took shallow breaths, perfectly still, watching and wishing she had picked a better position to freeze into. After a few minutes, her legs started to feel numb under her, and Carlton was so close that she could smell the light, pleasant scent of his shampoo. That's nice, she whispered. Thanks, Carlton said, knowing immediately what she was referring to. It comes in Ocean Breeze and Tropical Paradise. I prefer Ocean Breeze, but it tends to dry the scalp. Shh! John hissed. Charlie wasn't sure why she was so worried. It was just a night guard. At worst, they would be asked to leave, maybe yelled at a little. She had an overblown aversion to getting in trouble. The bobbing light came closer. Charlie was suddenly acutely aware of her body, holding every muscle motionless. Suddenly, she could make out a thin figure leaning in from the great room outside. He shone his light in a long beam down the hallway, sweeping it up and down the walls. He's got us, Charlie thought, but inexplicably, he turned and went, apparently satisfied. They waited another few minutes, but there was nothing. He was gone. They all moved slowly out from their crouched position, stretching limbs that had gone to sleep. Carlton shook one foot vigorously until he could stand on it. Charlie looked down at Jessica, who was still hunched over, as if frozen in time. Jessica, are you okay? She whispered. Jessica looked up, smiling. You won't believe this. She was pointing at the wall, and Charlie leaned over to see. There, etched in the worn brick, were clumsy letters, almost illegible in a child's handiwork. Carlton smells like feet. "You have got to be kidding me," John whispered in awe, turning to face the wall and placing both hands against it. "I recognize these bricks," he laughed. "These are the same bricks." His smile faded. "They didn't tear it down. They built around it. It's still here." Jessica unsuccessfully tried to keep her voice down. There has to be a way in," she added, her eyes wide with almost childish excitement. Charlie shone the flashlight up and down the hallway, playing the light off each wall, but there was no break, no door. "There was a back door to Freddy's," John said. "Marla wrote that right next to the back door, right?" "Why didn't they just knock it down?" Charlie pondered. "Does this hallway just lead nowhere?" Jessica said, puzzled. "It's the story of my life," Carlton said lightly. "Wait." Charlie ran her fingers along the edge of the shelf, peering through the odds and ends crammed onto it. The wall behind it looked different. It was metal, not brick. "Right here." She stepped back and looked at the others. "Help me move it," she said. John and Jessica pressed against one side in a unified effort, and she and Carlton pulled on the other. It was immensely heavy, laden with cleaning supplies and large buckets of nails and tools, but it slid farther down the hall almost easily, without incident. Jessica stepped back, breathing hard. "John, give me the light. Give me the big light again." He handed it over, and she turned it on, aiming where the shelf had stood. "This is it," she said. It was metal and rusting with splattered paint, a stark contrast with the walls around it. There was only a hole where the handle had been. Someone must have removed it so the shelf could lie flush against the door. Silently, Charlie handed the flashlight back to John, and he held it above her head so she could see. She slipped around the others and tried to squeeze her fingers into the hole where the knob had once been, trying to pull it open with no avail. "It's not going to open," she said. John was behind her, peering over her shoulder. "Just a second." He squeezed himself into the space behind her and knelt carefully. "I don't think it's locked or anything," he said. It's just a little rusty. Look at it." The door extended all the way to the floor, its bottom ragged and unfinished. The hinges were on the other side, and the edges were caked in rust. It looked as though it had not been opened in years. John and Charlie pulled on it together and moved a fraction of an inch. "Yay!" Jessica exclaimed, almost shouting, then covered her mouth. "Sorry," she said in a whisper, containing my excitement. They took turns pulling it, leaning over one another, the metal scraping their fingers. It held for a long moment, then came loose under their weight, swinging open with an unearthly screech. Charlie looked nervously over her shoulder, but the guard did not appear. The door opened only about a foot wide, and they went one by one until they were all through.